Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage the chairman of the Munich Security Conference, Ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger.
Could I please ask everyone to sit down, and those who wish to have a conversation to leave the room. We need to continue with the program, please. I need to impose some discipline here, I guess. Ladies and gentlemen, please leave the room if you want to have conversations. Stay here if you want to listen to the program. So now, ladies and gentlemen, let me continue the program. Lieber Herr Schmidt, können Sie sich bitte hinsetzen? Herr Schmidt, können Sie sich bitte hinsetzen? Wir wollen das Programm.
Mr. Schmidt, please find your seat. We'd like to continue with the program.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, after this session on the European Union and on NATO, and with the award ceremony honoring Jens Stoltenberg, we will now turn back to look at how Germany is doing and how Germany is confronting the challenges we're all facing, and the way Berlin is planning to approach these challenges. This is why it is my enormous privilege to present to you and to welcome Chancellor Olaf Scholz for his first presentation at the Munich Security Conference as the newly elected Chancellor. I may alert you to the fact that he will speak in German, so if you need headphones, please use the equipment, and I would like to invite Chancellor Scholz to take the floor.
Heads of state and government, dear colleagues, guests from Germany and abroad, Ambassador Ischinger, Ambassador Heusgen, ladies and gentlemen. Before I share with you some reflections on the state of the world and how we can manage the turning geopolitical tide which the MSC has this year placed on its agenda, I would first like to mention another turning tide. Not out there in the world, but here at the Bayerischer Hof. For 15 years, you, Wolfgang Ischinger, have not been just the host and head of the Munich Security Conference, but its driving force, a pioneer and a source of inspiration and motivation. Our conference today and tomorrow will be your last in this role. And so I would like to thank you for what you have done for international relations, and in particular the transatlantic friendship over the past years. Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador. I would also like to take this opportunity to give a warm welcome to your successor. If there is anyone who can follow in such mighty footsteps, then it is you, Christopher Heusgen, with your comprehensive international experience. And I'm delighted that we will remain in close contact with one another after you take up your new role. And I wish you all the best. Ladies and gentlemen, the Munich Security Conference has quite the sense of timing, as we all know only too well. And yet, I would be pleased if we could meet in slightly less turbulent times. Europe once again faces the threat of a war, and the risk has by no means been averted. As it dominates public debate, even global challenges such as the pandemic and the fight against climate change are fading into the background, and yet they urgently require a response. It is in this same spirit, Mr. Ischinger, that I understood your words yesterday when you called on democratic societies to unlearn their helplessness. I want to begin, not least given the critical security situation, by making one thing clear. Of course, there is the chorus of voices alternately proclaiming the demise of liberal democracies or of the West, or the international order that it has shaped. And I do not at all want to deny that the free democratic model of society has competition. But we can say with confidence that this model has held firm against this competition. The reasons for that have not changed today. Democracies are more adaptable and resilient in the long term because freedom of opinion and diversity of opinion, free elections, the recognition of political opposition, the protection of minorities ensure equitable societies. States in which the rule of law prevails generate confidence and stability. And countries are stronger when they respect human dignity instead of trampling on it. There is nothing divisive about confidently asserting this, because a life in freedom, justice and dignity is precisely not an exclusively Western aspiration, but a deeply human, universal one. This concept of universal values is also at the root of the international order that emerged from the cataclysms of the 20th century. It has ensured a balance of interests and growing prosperity, and not just in North America and Europe, but precisely in those parts of the world that now, in light of their increasing economic and political weight, want to have a greater say and a greater hand in shaping the future, and indeed must do so. We should welcome this drive to join in shaping events, as it is a mark of success, because independent and strong partners do not weaken our position. In fact, they offer the possibility of solving problems that even the biggest and strongest cannot handle alone. However, this international order is entirely dependent on a willingness to cooperate, even when discussion with the other party is challenging, with clear convictions, pragmatism, a healthy self-confidence, and yes, certainly, an awareness of one's own strength. It is sustained by one core promise, that everyone, even the strong, will play by the rules. And that brings me to what we have seen in the east of our continent in recent months. To put it plainly, there is nothing that justifies the deployment of well over 100,000 Russian soldiers surrounding Ukraine. Russia is holding up the issue of Ukraine's potential accession to NATO as a casus belli. That is a paradox, because there is no decision depending on the issue whatsoever. We Europeans and the transatlantic community have warned Russia that military aggression against Ukraine would be a severe error, and we want this not to happen. Russia has now disclosed its response to the proposals made by the US, and I say that, yes, we're ready to negotiate. And in doing so, we will, of course, make a clear distinction between untenable demands and legitimate security interests. We must have the confidence to differentiate between the two, given everything that is at stake. The fundamental principles of the OSCE are non-negotiable for us. Russia has agreed to them, and they include the right to freely choose one's alliances. At the same time, there are questions of security that are important for both sides. First and foremost, transparency around weapons systems and exercises, risk mitigation mechanisms, and new approaches to arms control. At my meeting with President Putin on Tuesday, I made it clear that any further violation of the territorial integrity of Ukraine will have a high price for Russia in political, economic, and geostrategic terms. And I added at the same time that diplomacy will not fail because of us. As much diplomacy as possible without being naive. That is what we strive for. And we are utilizing all channels of communication to this end. The NATO-Russia Council, which has met again for the first time in years. The OSCE, where conflict prevention can be discussed with all Europeans, Russians and Americans. Poland, as the current chair, has made suggestions in this regard. There is the bilateral channel between Russia and the United States, and we're utilizing the Normandy format. It remains crucial for the resolution of the Ukraine conflict. During my visits to Kyiv and Moscow, both sides emphasized their readiness to implement the Minsk agreements. And I'm very grateful above all to President Zelensky for his commitment to now make progress with the necessary laws and to discuss these in the trilateral contact group. Of course, I'm not under any illusions. We cannot expect to see progress overnight. However, we can only stop this crisis in its tracks if we negotiate. For what is at stake, after all, is nothing less than peace in Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, all of this has to be accompanied by a repositioning of Europe and the transatlantic alliance in a changed world. The strategy processes within the European Union and NATO therefore hold a special significance. And I would like to mention 4 more fundamental considerations here today. Firstly, we will develop a broader understanding of security. The MSC, Mr. Ischinger, has always been a pioneer in this respect. It has come to address the risks arising from climate change, global health crises, or the abuse of cyberspace and new technologies as a matter of course. But for this broad understanding to emerge, it is essential for the European Union and NATO to complement and reinforce one another, to prepare themselves to face new risks. Ultimately, a cyber attack remains a cyber attack, regardless of whether it is directed from St. Petersburg, Tehran, or Pyeongchang. I think we agree, however, that taking new threats like these into account is something different than laying claim to a globally active NATO. Indeed, the developments of recent months in particular show us how vital it remains to concentrate on the issue of defending the alliance in the North Atlantic area. And we need to muster the capabilities required for this. And yes, that includes Germany too. Airplanes that fly, ships that can set out to sea, soldiers who are optimally equipped for their dangerous tasks. These are things that a country of our size, a country that bears a special responsibility within Europe, must be able to manage. And I believe that we owe this to our allies in NATO too. To them I address myself and say that Germany stands by the guarantee of Article 5 unconditionally, and we're also showing practical solidarity at the moment, for example, with a greater Bundeswehr presence in the Baltic and with NATO air policing in the alliance's southeast. That brings me to my second point. The repositioning of our alliances is not taking place in a vacuum. There is an interplay with other players and their ambitions. The starting point for this is a clear-headed analysis of the world around us. Almost 8 billion people currently live on our planet, and this number is rising. Just a fraction of the total, 450 million and 330 million respectively, live in the European Union or the United States. We can see similar trends when we look at our shares in the global economy in recent decades. The slices of the pie are shrinking. And for me, this means that the world of the 21st century is neither unipolar nor bipolar. It will have various centers of power. And this development is not in itself a bad thing. If prosperity increases as a result, or to stay with the metaphor, if the pie as a whole becomes bigger, over 1 billion fewer people live in extreme poverty today than 30 years ago, and this achievement is an achievement of the entire international community, one that we must fight for, particularly now amid the pandemic. And the emergence of a middle class in countries such as China, Indonesia and India also benefits workers here. In Asia in particular, it is in any case not a rise that we should speak of, but if anything, a revival. Being a major power from the perspective of Beijing or Delhi is not a historical anomaly, but rather a return to the status quo ante. And there's nothing wrong with that. Quite the opposite. What is problematic is when this growth in significance is translated into a demand for legions or spheres of influence. When universal rules that someone previously upheld are swept aside overnight. No country should be the backyard of another. The aspirations to power of China in particular must be seen in a nuanced light, and our stance on them will be just as nuanced. We will seek cooperation where this is in our mutual interest, in the fight against climate change and poverty, or as challenging as it might be, on the issue of arms control. We will strengthen our own capabilities, and we will give a firm response where the preservation of the multilateral order is threatened or human rights are trampled underfoot. But in all three areas, the same holds true. The more closely Europe and North America coordinate, the more successful we will be. And that brings me to my third remark. We need clarity on the level of the European Union's ambition when it comes to its own security and beyond. The key word here is European sovereignty. I've just described the shifts in geopolitical power that we are facing these days. With regard to the United States, it is clear that it will remain a center of gravity even in a multipolar world. And there can be no doubt about that, and my talks in Washington last week strengthened this conviction. But for Europe, things look different. We Europeans can only preserve our ability to act effectively and to make autonomous decisions if we pool our will and our capabilities within the European Union. And incidentally, when I talk of the European Union, I also mean the countries of the Western Balkans. It is not enough to cite the prospect of enlargement for this region as a strategic goal. We must actively advance it. I'm pleased that so many colleagues from the region are here today, because this task is a shared one. The European Union is our framework for action, our opportunity to remain a power among powers. And that is what we mean when we talk of European sovereignty. On the path to achieving this, we need three things. Firstly, the willingness to act as a power among powers. Secondly, joint strategic goals. And thirdly, the capabilities to meet these goals. We are working on all these factors. And they also make clear the level of ambition that the EU's new strategic compass must reach. It includes European efforts to fight terrorism, from civilian stabilization to equipment and to military training. It includes fresh momentum for more effective arms control, which creates transparency and confidence here in Europe. Talks with Russia, should they take place, can mark the beginning of these efforts. And finally, it also includes active European diplomacy, such as we are practicing in our dealings with Iran, for example. Apropos Iran, we've come far in the negotiations in Vienna over the last 10 months. All of the elements for conclusion to the negotiations are on the table. However, if Iran continues to enrich fuel while also suspending IAEA monitoring, that is unacceptable. For us, a nuclear-armed Iran is unacceptable. Not least because the security of Israel is non-negotiable. And so we have repeatedly indicated that the point will soon be reached where we will have to decide whether a return to the JCPOA is still at all reasonable. We have an opportunity now to reach an agreement that makes it possible for the sanctions to be lifted, and at the same time If we do not succeed in this very soon, the negotiations risk failing. Iran's leadership has the choice. Now is the moment of truth. I believe the nuclear talks led by the EU are a good example of what Europe can achieve together with its partners. And that brings me to my fourth and final point, something that I hope for and request of you. Let us stick together as friends and allies. Sticking together for our friends and partners, that also means accepting the European Union as a single entity, recognizing it as an international player and supporting further EU integration. We have quite enough to do with our opponents trying to divide us. And so I'm deeply grateful to you, Kamala Harris, to our many friends in the US Congress and the American administration for upholding the promise day after day that President Biden made here in Munich last year to support the goal of a Europe whole and free and at peace. This whole, free, peaceful, and, I would add, sovereign European Union is not targeted against anyone, and it is absolutely not a risk to transatlantic cohesion. On the contrary, ultimately, only an effective and capable Europe will remain an attractive partner for the United States, as a strong European pillar in the transatlantic alliance, as a loud and clear voice for democracy, freedom and justice, and as America's closest friend and partner. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to your questions and to our discussion. Thank you very much for giving me your attention.
Handmikrofon ist hier. Ladies and gentlemen, we will have this discussion in principle in German, but those of you who wish to ask a question in English, please feel free to do so. So we'll do it in a flexible manner. Herr
Chancellor, may I begin with a personal preliminary remark? Your predecessor, and that was roughly 16 years ago, said, I will come to the Munich Security Conference every other year, and I speak on behalf of the next chairperson and invite you to surpass this by coming every year. That's the first preliminary remark. Second, you pointed out some questions and issues, and I'd like to use this opportunity for a little bit of marketing, self-marketing. In the Munich Security Report, which we published a couple of days ago, we tried to take up some of the things that you mentioned.
You can download it from the Munich Security Conference website. So it's available in print also, but we cannot distribute copies in the hall for pandemic reasons. Please bear with us.
So, after these preliminary remarks, Chancellor, my first question is, you just mentioned it, but a few days ago, you spent hours talking to President Putin himself. Maybe you can share your personal impression with this renowned audience. Do you believe that there still is some diplomatic scope, diplomatic leeway for de-escalation, some leeway to bring the positions of the West and us and Russia together?
We must not be naive. That is of the utmost importance. So we have to see what can be seen. We cannot ignore it. The massing of troops along the Ukrainian border is an obvious event, along the border with Ukraine and also along the border with Belarus, and also the naval forces that are being gathered. All the military capacities and capabilities that are required for military intervention in Ukraine are there. That is an undeniable fact. And at the same time, it will always be our task, and continue to be our task, to use any openings, however minor they may be, in order to open the road towards negotiations. So despite the differences that may be noticeable here with regard to interpreting the documents available to us. And I made that clear in my discussion with Putin and also with regard to the response he sent to NATO. I read that they are in favor of negotiating on arms control issues and on issues such as transparency. So discussing differences is something that leads to negotiations. Everyone who's here will not be in a position to forecast what is going to happen. Those who were to dare to do so would be giving in to hubris. So it's a discussion that we need to engage in. And we have to use the opportunities that are there, the openings that open up. And the dual strategy that we have chosen is exactly the right approach. We said and say on the one hand, we have prepared ourselves much better than we used to be in many similar situations. We can immediately take decisions on necessary sanctions should there be a military aggression. And at the same time, we say we want to engage, we want to negotiate, but on the basis of our principles. Perhaps one further comment in that regard. Putin has been very active as a historian of late, published documents that many of you may have read. And they played a major part in my discussion with him. But to me personally, this is something that I find very important indeed. Peace in Europe can only be preserved if the borders are being accepted as they are, if no one aims to change them. When we go back in the history books, we will always find a reason for wars that may last hundreds of years, but they will devastate our continent. It has to be clear that we accept the borders as they are today, that we accept the sovereignty of those countries that are there, and that is the only principle that can guarantee security in Europe.
I would like to point out again that you can all ask questions. There are two ways of doing this. Either you howl out, you holler, or you use the electronic possibility using the tablet to send questions to me, which I will introduce if we have enough time.
Don't hesitate to raise your arm. You can ask questions here or use the electronic method to raise questions. I'll ask one more and then we go to the audience. Herr Bundeskanzler, gestern schon in der
Chancellor, in the opening session yesterday that the American Secretary of State Tony Blinken and our Foreign Minister Ms. Baerbock participated in, the issue of weapon deliveries to Ukraine became an issue, and we discussed this. And I wanted to ask you, Germany, being an important industrial nation, also is an exporter of military equipment. And none of us hope this, but should there be a military confrontation, what would you say looking back? Would you say we should have done more over the course of the past years to contribute to Ukraine's defensive posture, or would you stick to the principle, we won't?
For a very long time already, we have been applying very tight arms export restrictions. As I said, they're very tight indeed. And abiding by those regulations, it's never been possible for Germany to deliver such weapons to countries like Ukraine. This may not come as a surprise to many people because this applies to a similar situation in other parts of the world. We have supported Ukraine in other ways. We are the biggest financial supporters for Ukraine. For many, many years, we have supporting them ever since 2014, and we intend to continue to be the country that makes the biggest contribution towards the financial and economic stabilization of Ukraine. And I think everyone is aware of that, at least when you talk to them behind closed doors. And it would be nice if it would find its reflection somewhere in the discussion outside those closed doors. We have committed to that obligation of ours, and we stand by that sense of support for Ukraine. I raised the issue of us increasing our support for the presence of troops in the Baltic states and also the air policing mission.
Thank you very much. I think the first question
to address is a former recipient of the Kleist Award, former Senator Joe Lieberman. We are so glad you could come, Senator, dear Joe. You have the floor.
Thank you, dear Wolfgang. Thank you for your years of leadership of this conference in the Transatlantic Alliance. It's an honor to be back. Chancellor, let me first thank you for your remarks this morning. It's self-evident that in America and elsewhere we are beginning to get to know you. And I thought your remarks today were very reassuring and very encouraging. They were strong, they were clear, and they were principled. They were based on the principles of democracy and human rights, as you stated so eloquently, that are at the heart of the Transatlantic Alliance of NATO and of the European community. And I thought you dissected the Russian position very effectively, particularly from the point that Putin claims that he has massed these troops around Ukraine to stop Ukraine from becoming part of NATO when that's not even on the table. And I would add that Putin's position is even more inconsistent and illogical because, of course, NATO is a defensive alliance. It doesn't threaten the Russians at all. But it leads me to this question. I fear in some way we all have not invited this crisis around Ukraine, but enabled it by hesitating to move forward on the general promise we've made, as the Secretary General said earlier, of the openness of NATO and the European Union to nations based on their own self-determination, and that we have done this probably out of some deference to Russia. And I think that has enabled Putin to take this aggressive stand he has taken. So I wanted to ask you whether one of the lessons we should learn from this crisis, when it is over, hopefully peacefully, is to begin to accelerate what clearly seems to be the desire of the people of Ukraine to side with, join Europe and the Transatlantic Alliance, which is to say to accelerate their membership first in the European Union and then eventually in NATO. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm sure that we did not invite Putin for the things he is doing. And to be very clear, NATO is not aggressive. There is no reason for being afraid. The European Union is not aggressive. There is no reason for being afraid. He argues different, but in the end, from our point of view, this is absolutely clear. And when I'm saying this to him, he always is arguing with the former conflict in former Yugoslavia, saying their NATO was aggressive and was harming people that having done nothing. I answered to him, that this was a genocide we tried to avoid with what we did. And he should not misunderstand that the people on the Western Balkan are absolutely willing to become member of the European Union. So this is not how they see it in the end. And so there is a real difference. And then he's coming to argue that in Donbass there is something like genocide, which is really ridiculous, to be very clear on that. But this is his story. And it's always important that we look more intensely into what others say. And I already quoted the article Putin wrote half a year ago. If we would take him literally, this would not let us being very optimistic about the future. But I refuse to do that. I think it's just discussing about history, and I am answering, as I did in the first talk we had here, that we cannot change borders, that we have to accept the integrity and sovereignty of states that are there in Europe. And coming back to your question, this is the real problem, that there is not the NATO membership of Ukraine on the agenda. It will not happen the next time, and even not in the near time. Putin knows that. But he is arguing that because of a potential risk that this may happen, he is in this situation, and that he has any right to act as he is doing. I think he is completely wrong, and we have to insist on that. And this is why it is one of our political leadership tasks that we speak open about this fact. And on the other hand, we have to assure that for democratic alliances, as the NATO, as European Union, as, if you may, the United States, they never can say there is not a principal openness. So yes, when you took new states to become the part of the United States of America, this is a time long ago. I think possibly Puerto Rico might come, but it is not too many other states that will do so. And something like this will happen to other alliances as well, that though they are principally open, there is the moment when you understand that there will be not too many movements in the future. But coming back to what is the situation we are in, this is not where we are. We are facing a conflict in Europe about a question that is not on the agenda, and this is unacceptable, and this is what we are having to argue, and this is what we have to make clear when we go to what we want, talks between different parties to go away from that situation.
Thank you very much, Chancellor.
I'm going to go to my tablet. There's one question which I find, we have many questions, but I have to be selective, I apologize. There's one question from Noah Barkin, who is a think tank person, and his question is the following, I quote, "How concerned are you about closer cooperation between Russia and China? And how might Chinese support for Russian aggression in Ukraine affect and change Germany's relationship, Germany's ties to or with China?"
So we should understand that the world has changed with the 90s. To make it clear, there are only capitalist countries on the globe, but North Korea. And if you see it like this, the difference between the states is about autocracy, about the way how we rule our countries, about democracy, but not about the way of how we do capitalism. Yes, there are different ways, even within, but in Europe and in North America. But it is in the end not that we are in a situation similar to that that happened since after the Bolshevist revolution that brought the Soviet Union. And so it is our task to understand that there are also conflicts between former communist states like Russia and China, and that they will not just vanish because they are agreeing on the way of leading a country. And so let's be clear that this is all a bit misunderstanding the real situation. And this is why I referred to the situation of the world we are living in, and especially the world that we will face in 2050 or so. Then 10 billion people living on the globe. Scientists tell us that they will not increase over 10 billion, that the population will not go over 10 billion, but this is something. And then still we will be 450 and 303 million people in the United States and Europe, or the other way. And understanding this, it is absolutely clear that we are going into a world that is multipolar. But the principles that are bringing us together as democracies, they are more important than. And so I'm not that much afraid. And I think that we will be able to develop a strategy which is clear on questions that are important for us, like democracy, a rule of law, and all this. And on the other hand, making it not happen that there is a domination and spheres of interest for countries like Russia or China. And you can be sure all the other upcoming or already great nations of Asia will not accept it. Not Korea, not Japan, not Vietnam, not Indonesia, not Malaysia, not India. We should be clear on that, and we should be a partner on developing a world that creates peace, understanding that.
Thank you very much. We've actually run out of time, but I will take one more if you promise to make it really brief. And I can't even see you through your mask, so you need to identify yourself, please, back there in the room. Now, here it is.
Thank you. Ken Roth from Human Rights Watch.
Human Rights Watch.
Mr. Chancellor, the prior German government was criticized for allowing business interests to stand in the way of a consistently strong human rights policy. This came up during the German presidency of the European Union when Chancellor Merkel signed off on an investment deal with China with very weak provisions against the forced labor of Uyghur Muslims. It came up with the European Union budget where she settled for kicking the can down the road on rule of law conditionality for Hungary and Poland. And it comes up with gas purchases from Russia. So my question to you is, what steps will you take to ensure that German business interests do not stand in the way of a stronger German governmental commitment to promoting human rights?
Germany is committed to human rights, to make this clear. And we already worked very hard on legislations. Some of them we already have. And we try to convince others to be helpful in this field on the global level and in debates we have internationally. So we have now a very strict supply chain legislation in Germany. And the European Union will have a similar legislation very soon. And I hope other countries will follow, so that we give responsibility to corporates, to companies, that they are responsible what is happening in their supply chain. We have to do it in a very pragmatic way, but this is one of the answers we are giving to this question. It's a very progressive and a very effective answer. This is the same when we are discussing about trade agreements, saying that, for instance, referring to the International Labour Organization's basic principles is one of the things we ask for. So this is also an answer to your question, how to deal with that. And being clear on human rights, on minority rights, on the rule of law, and in the end, democracy. And this is why I referred in my speech so intensely to the question that democracies are strong, and this is what the people are having and want to have from their heart. It is not just for us in Europe or for us in the United States. It's something for us in the world, which people like to have. If we understand this, we can be clear on principles. We have to find ways how we make them more important in international relations, and I've explained two of them to you. And my view is that this does not mean that we are preferring decoupling. This is a mistake. It would be a big mistake for all our people now in the world, because globalization in the end created wealth and in all our countries. And many companies all over the world are successful, though they are very small, but they produce for the world market. And if they would just produce things or develop IP or export services just for a small market of their nation or of the European Union or of the United States, they would be never that successful as they are. So having globalization is something that gives us all together a better chance for better income. And I already said that it is a great advantage that there are now middle classes all over the world, in Africa, in the South of America, in Asia, and we should be happy to have this being more important for the future. But this does not mean that we are not looking for human rights and for the rule of law, and we have to create policies how we can do it, and in international trade relations there are options, and I explained two of them to you.
Herr Bundeskanzler, ganz herzlichen Dank.
Chancellor, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Thank you very much. Also, on behalf of my successor, I'd like to repeat the invitation. Please come back next year. We need you.
If you can, stay in the room. The program will continue with Vice President Harris in less than 10 minutes. And once the doors are closed, you're not going to get back in. Let's offer a round of applause to the Chancellor. Herzlichen Dank, Herr Bundeskanzler.
Olaf Scholz, Federal Chancellor of Germany. And what did Olaf Scholz say? Well, he said that the threat of a war in Europe is far from being over. And also he made one thing very clear: democracy rocks. Not a verbatim quote, obviously. Coming up next, Kamala Harris, Vice President of the United States. You are watching BR24 live on the Munich Security Conference, and we'll be right back after this. friends, and we'll continue with the so-called spotlight. And this is a world premiere. For the first time in history, a female vice president is representing the United States of America. So we'll jump right into the thick of it, the US on the international stage.
It was in 2009, the first conference that I had the privilege of organizing and chairing, when for the first time in our history, the Vice President of the United States came and spoke. That happened to be Mr. Joe Biden, then newly elected Vice President. It is a wonderful end of my tenure for me personally, at the last conference that I have this honor of chairing it, to welcome once again the Vice President of the United States. And this time it is, of course, Kamala Harris, whom I would now like to invite on stage. And let me just add one additional word before we welcome her. It is such a great surprise for me and my team, and I think for all Germans, to see that we have this senior representation by the US administration, but we also have such a terrific congressional delegation, led by the Speaker, led by Senators Graham and Whitehouse, and we have the future US Ambassador in Germany with us, Ambassador Goodman. Welcome to you also. So now, yeah. Madam Vice President, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Ambassador Ischinger. And to all of the very extraordinary leaders who are here today, I thank you for the kind introduction and your years of dedicated leadership. And thank you also to Chancellor Scholz for your kind words. So it is an honor to join all of these distinguished leaders from around the world this morning. I am certain we all recognize this year's gathering is unlike those of the recent past. Not since the end of the Cold War has this forum convened under such dire circumstances. Today, as we are all well aware, the foundation of European security is under direct threat in Ukraine. Let us remember, from the wreckage of 2 world wars, a consensus emerged in Europe and the United States. A consensus in favor of order, not chaos. Security, not conflict. So by forging relationships and bonds, forging organizations and institutions, laws and treaties, we together established a set of rules, norms that have governed ever since. And Europe has enjoyed unprecedented peace, security, and prosperity through a commitment to a set of defining principles. The United States is equally committed to these principles. That people have a right to choose their own form of government. That nations have a right to choose their own alliances. That there are inalienable rights which governments must protect. That the rule of law should be cherished, that sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states must be respected, and that national borders should not be changed by force. We are here in Munich together to reaffirm our commitment to these principles. These principles have brought us peace and security. The backbone of this, of course, is NATO, the greatest military alliance the world has ever seen. As a defensive alliance, we have deterred acts of aggression against NATO territory for the past 75 years. And today, let me be clear, America's commitment to Article 5 is ironclad. This commitment is sacrosanct to me, to President Biden, and to our entire nation. In fact, I am joined here in Munich by a bipartisan delegation from the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives. They are Democrats and Republicans. They have a wide range of political views, but they stand together in recognition of the value and the importance of our NATO alliance. Now, even in the most difficult times for our transatlantic community, and even when our system has been tried and tested, we, the United States and Europe, have come together and demonstrated our strength and our unity, just as we do today. As we stand in this decisive moment with all eyes on Ukraine. As we have said all along, there is a playbook of Russian aggression. And this playbook is too familiar to us all. Russia will plead ignorance and innocence. It will create false pretext for invasion, and it will amass troops and firepower in plain sight. We now receive reports of what appears to be provocations, and we see Russia spreading disinformation, lies, and propaganda. Nonetheless, in a deliberate and coordinated effort, we together are, one, exposing the truth, and two, speaking with a unified voice. As President Joe Biden has made clear, the United States, our NATO allies, and our partners have been and remain open to serious diplomacy. We have put concrete proposals on the table. We have encouraged and engaged Russia through NATO, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the United Nations, and bilateral dialogues. We have engaged in good faith. Russia continues to claim it is ready for talks, while at the same time, it narrows the avenues for diplomacy. Their actions simply do not match their words. And let me be clear, I can say with absolute certainty, if Russia further invades Ukraine, the United States, together with our allies and partners, will impose significant and unprecedented economic costs. We have worked intensively with many of you in this room to ensure we are prepared to move forward with consequences. We have prepared together economic measures that will be swift, severe, and united. We will impose far-reaching financial sanctions and export controls. We will target Russia's financial institutions and key industries. And we will target those who are complicit and those who aid and abet this unprovoked invasion. Make no mistake, the imposition of these sweeping and coordinated measures will inflict great damage on those who must be held accountable. And we will not stop with economic measures. We will further reinforce our NATO allies on the eastern flank. In fact, together, we have already taken steps to strengthen our deterrence and collective defense. We have deployed an additional 6,000 American service members to Romania, Poland, and Germany. We have put another 8,500 service members in the United States on a heightened sense of readiness. As President Biden has said, our forces will not be deployed to fight inside Ukraine, but they will defend every inch of NATO territory. Since Russia launched its proxy war against Ukraine nearly 8 years ago, the people of Ukraine have suffered immensely. Nearly 14,000 people killed, more than 1 million displaced, and nearly 3 million in need of aid. The United States has provided significant support to Ukraine: security assistance, humanitarian assistance, and economic assistance. And we will continue to support the people of Ukraine. I believe it is important for all of us as leaders to never forget the cost of this type of aggression on human lives and livelihoods. So, the United States, our allies, and our partners, together we have achieved remarkable unity. It is evident in our shared acknowledgement of the threats, our united response, and our determination to uphold international rules and norms. In the face of Russian aggression, I have been reassured and heartened by the widespread agreement across the transatlantic community that these rules and norms will be defended. And we should not lose sight of how rare it is in history to have a prolonged period of relative peace and stability. So let the past few months be a reminder to us all. Defending the rules and norms, upholding our principles, this is the vital work of each generation. In recent years, some have questioned whether the West is up to the task. Some have wondered whether this system can endure. Some have done so even on this very stage. Indeed, the theme of this conference 2 years ago questioned the staying power of the West, whether or not the transatlantic community was losing its cohesion, its influence, its appeal. So I will answer the skeptics and those seeking to test us. Today, the United States, our allies, and our partners are closer together. Today, we are clear in our purpose. And today, we are even more confident in our vision. Our strength must not be underestimated, because after all, it lies in our unity. And as we have always shown, it takes a lot more strength to build something up than it takes to tear something down. Thank you all.
Vice President, thank you so much for this great speech, which I think will be commented about and read about quite a bit in coming hours and days and weeks. Before we start our conversation, let me repeat what I said before you came into the hall. It was in 2009, President Biden, who established, having just been elected vice president at that time, a young tradition, namely that the United States would be represented in Munich by the vice president. And he came several times, and I was delighted to see that even the Trump administration followed that example. And we're now so happy to have you to continue this tradition. And I would be delighted if you convey to the president that even if he is now no longer the vice president, he has always a standing invitation here.
Yes, Ambassador, I will, and I will tell you it is the President's enthusiasm about the importance of this conference that led to my enthusiasm to be with you this afternoon, so thank you very much.
Now, on a slightly more serious note, a year ago, when the President appeared on our screen, actually in this room, I was standing right here in this room, when he appeared on screen, and he said, and I quote, "America is back. The transatlantic alliance is back." Now, that was a message that was extremely well received here, even if not all of us knew that we would be threatened in the way that we feel threatened right now, as you just explained. But as we look forward, there are lots of people here in Germany, in Europe, who are asking themselves, okay, America is back, that's great, but is it for good? Is this for good? Many in Europe are fearful of a time where maybe some kind of a second Trump could be looming in the future. So here's my question. What can or should we Europeans do to keep the United States engaged in Europe long term? Not just today as we sit here, and even beyond the current administration. I think that is such an important question, because we have learned over these last weeks and months that without the United States considering herself a European power, we're actually quite powerless.
I think the evidence of the point that I will make is present in this room. You will see there is probably one of the largest delegations from the United States Congress present today, Republicans and Democrats, who, as I said earlier, often don't agree on much, but agree on this. I think that the heart of your question really does demand the importance of the perseverance and enduring nature of institutions and alliances. And I would say that on that point we are strong. There is an unwavering commitment to NATO and to the alliance, as evidenced again by the conversations and the unity that has resulted over the last several months, where nations have come together, where the United States, we would like to believe, has been among leaders in playing a leadership role to bring together the allies around common principles and norms, doing it in a way that has been at its essence about the value and the strength of diplomacy, which is about direct engagement. We have counted, and the Secretary of State is here, Tony Blinken. We have counted in excess of at least 200 conversations just in the last couple of months, be it between the President and others, the Secretary of State, myself, and so on. So I would say to you that the relationship is strong, and that the importance of the relationship is something that we take very seriously, which is why in this historic moment, in this defining moment, potentially, the strength of the institution and the alliance reveals itself, even if there's been a question about that before.
Thank you so much. Now, Another key theme of our special edition with President Biden a year ago was this question, and I'd be interested in your response today. The question was, can democracies prove that they can still deliver better solutions to the world's major challenges than autocracies? There are skeptics who would probably not have a hard time finding evidence to the contrary over the past period. What do we need? What do democracies need in order to do better and to convince our peoples that we can do it?
Ambassador, I think this is one of the most challenging issues of our time, which is the relative strength, the question about the relative strength, efficiency, and effectiveness of democracies versus autocracies. I'm going to always bet on democracies. I think all of us here share that in common. And it is a reflection of, again, the principles that we have that include the importance of being a government that reflects the needs and desires of the people through a process that has integrity, that rejects corruption, and embraces the concepts of equality and freedom. When we look at the challenge that we face now in the United States, and you are right, President Joe Biden talks a lot about this, and we take pride in the fact that the strength of a democracy, one measure of that strength will be, does it deliver on the needs of the people? So, for example, in the United States, again, with thanks and with great attribution to the congressional delegates that are here, we passed a bipartisan infrastructure law that was one of the first in generations that will deliver on the needs of the people. So I would say that the strength of democracies and the way that democracies will prevail, one measure of that will be, does it actually deliver for the people? But that being said, there is a duality that is always present, I believe, which is that democracy is both, it both has the characteristics of strength and fragility, meaning that it is incumbent on each of us to understand the strength of democracy to deliver for the people, but also the fragility of democracies, which is that if we are not vigilant, if we don't fight for the principles, then they can fail. And so that, again, brings us to the reason that we are here today, to continuously reaffirm and rededicate ourselves as a community to the strength of democracies and the need for us to not only individually but collectively uphold its principles, its values, and its purpose.
Thank you very much. Now, I think I have no choice but to return to our overriding theme this weekend, which has been, when Secretary Stoltenberg spoke earlier and Chancellor Scholz spoke just before you, of course, the central theme was, and you talked about it just a few minutes ago, was Ukraine. So the Biden administration, the president himself, you've all stated that you expect that there will be some kind of military action by Russia going forward. Now, I have no question about your determination to do what you announced to do. But I think this audience would be interested in how you and the Biden administration judges our readiness. Do you think we Europeans are sufficiently prepared for such a kind of a worst-case scenario, which would, in my view at least, which would tend to sort of, terminate the search for a durable and peaceful European security architecture? And we've been working on that for more than a generation, for 2 generations. So the question is, if you could reflect a bit about how you think about this and what conceivably Americans and Europeans working together, what we could do in the future even better in terms of speaking with Russia, not only about Russia. One of the things I really regret is that the Russian government decided not to come here, I would have appreciated an opportunity to challenge them on the stage, as has been the case for many years here in Munich. So, but I think you understand my question.
Well, as I said in my speech, I am reassured and heartened by the work that we have collectively done over the last several months. And it is work. Not everyone started out in the same place in terms of a variety of issues that are on the table. How do we define aggression? What should be the consequences? Which consequences are appropriate? Which are we willing to pursue? Which aren't we willing to pursue? So we didn't all start out in the same place, but through diplomacy, and again, this speaks to the strength of diplomacy, we came together and are now speaking with a unified voice. And that voice was a function of not only dialogue, but debate, some concessions, but also a practical realization of the moment that we're in, which is that we are looking at a sovereign nation that may very well be on the verge of being invaded yet again. And perhaps this is a moment, as life does present us, with those moments that challenge us to ask, what is our reason for being? And I think we all know the history of NATO and its reason for being. The spirit behind this term we use, the transatlantic community. The word community meaning a collection, not a collection of individuals who see themselves as a collection than as one. And that's where we are now. I don't disagree with you that it would be nice if we were presented with other circumstances, be it at this conference or in the world, but that's not where we are. We remain open to diplomacy. We have said it continuously, and our deeds, our words, and our actions have reflected that priority. We believe that when you define the strength of any nation, certainly I'll speak for the United States, we believe it is an expression of our strength to seek, as a first priority, a diplomatic resolution to any conflict. And I believe we've been clear about that. But yet we are presented with this moment today. And so the question is, if that diplomacy leads to a dead end, we hope it does not. I said that again in my speech today. The President said it last night. We are still open to a diplomatic resolution. But if it does not, we are also clear-eyed that there must be consequences. And so we have clearly articulated the consequences we have in store. And they will be severe and swift. And they were derived through a process, again, of diplomatic discussions and engagement, wherein there has been some consensus around what would be appropriate, given perhaps some predictable scenarios. I think this moment speaks to, yes, a moment we would like to avoid, if it was avoidable, but it also speaks to our resolve to speak with one voice, in a unified voice. History has challenged us over the years in that regard, but I think history will show that at this moment, we are standing strong.
Madam Vice President, I can only thank you on behalf of our participants, of this audience, and of those who are listening from the outside, for traveling, for coming over here in these difficult circumstances with pandemic conditions. You know, under more normal circumstances, there would be like 600 people in this hall. It would be totally overcrowded. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing this for us here in Europe. It's an enormously reassuring message. And I want to invite all of you to offer to the Vice President of the United States a warm round of applause, if you could, please.
So that was Kamala Harris on the international stage at the Munich Security Conference 2022. You are watching BR24 live, and joining us live once again is Thorsten Teichmann, our US correspondent. Thorsten, so great to have you back again. This has been a very clear and strong speech Kamala Harris just gave, right?
Yeah, the US side in the conflict with Russia stays on the script and repeats its talk and saying that they are open for diplomacy, but in case diplomacy fails, they also have severe consequences for Russia in case Russia again uses its military to incurse into the Ukraine. So in this case, the clear messaging is there. She repeated it. She again reiterated that the work together with the Europeans is of very high importance here in Washington, D.C. I think it was very interesting to see Ischinger asking her what the Europeans can do better, and also whether the USA stays for good as a partner for the Europeans. That's a very difficult question to answer. We have elections here in this year for Congress, and then looming already the next presidential elections, a lot of talk about Trump running again. So the question was fair there. She said that Democrats and Republicans came to this conference to Munich, and that should be a sign that institutions and conferences persevere. But I think the question still is there, is the engagement that the US shows currently in the current crisis, is it for good and will it stay?
Thorsten, Kamala Harris had several high-profile trips as the US has partnered with key allies in an attempt to deter Russia from invading Ukraine. How important is her being here today?
I think she's there on behalf of the president, and it was a very important speech for her. You have to see that she has a wide portfolio, mainly here in the US, about social justice. She has a portfolio about dealing with the border issues. A lot of people still migrating from Middle America and South America to the United States, and the solution is not found for the very dire situation at the border to Mexico. And she has this really wide portfolio here, which is dealing with domestic issues. So on the international front, she's sent to Europe to have this message of the Americans that first, it is in the American interest to work together with their European allies, and second, to have a strong message against Russia in the current Russia crisis around the border of Ukraine. And I think that she's there just shows the high stake that we're talking about. I mean, we always can talk about what is the interest here of the different partners or the different contraries in this crisis. But I think it shows that the work that Europeans and Americans want to do together is underlined by her visit to Munich.
The US and Europe reunited, and it feels so good. That actually could be the headline of this conference so far, or what do you think, Thorsten?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, they're showing that they're working together on all kinds of levels. But then again, Europeans and Americans are also facing the same challenges. I mean, Kamala Harris was speaking about a rule-based system in Europe. And then we heard yesterday Mr. Guterres saying that we have a moral bankruptcy of the financial sector, that we have inequality in this world, that we have poverty in this world. All those problems we're facing together, the US and Europe. And maybe this should be addressed as well, not just the primary security concern that we have currently right now with Ukraine and Russia, but also the underlying issues. And rule-based is fine, but rule-based should work on every level, not just the political and security level, but also on other levels. And maybe there our societies in Europe and in the US can share a lot about what is working and what isn't so good working.
The US is very invested into this situation, one could say, because the US and Europe are standing strongly together. But one could also ask, is it because the US is under the impression Europe couldn't handle it all by itself?
I think the impression of the current Biden administration, and I think the Secretary of State Blinken yesterday said it, is that no country can handle the current challenges by itself, not even the US. I think this was his words. So I think the challenges globally are so huge that the perception that one country can be on itself, a perception that we got from the former administration, who were thinking that if you have a power sharing, then you're losing power. So you have to be on yourself. You have to be strong yourself. I think this perception or this idea is not the idea of the Biden administration. It's not so much that Europe can't handle itself. It is more that all the countries in the world have to work together to come to a solution. I think that's very clear from here.
Thorsten, after the election in the United States, especially here in Germany, you didn't hear much from the Vice President Kamala Harris. How is she viewed in the States?
Yeah, that's very difficult to come to a clear conclusion here, because she is also in this kind of culture war. So we have one side of the country in the United States that make her days hell, and the other side really are fond of her and support her. And so it's very unclear to say where she stands in terms of people in the United States. I think there is some disillusion about how much she can move. I think there was big expectations, being her the first black woman, being her the first woman with South Asian descent, and so the family is from South Asian descent. So I think the expectations were very, very high, and there might be some people who are saying, oh, we expect much more, that she's much more influential here. But again, there's also quite a culture clash here. When we look at the news, programs like CNN, MSNBC will support her. Programs like Fox News do their money with bashing her. So I don't come to a clear picture where we stand right now in the perception of the Vice President in the United States.
Thank you so much, Thorsten. For now, we have to move on because the stage is set for Wang Yi, China's State Councillor and Minister of Foreign Affairs, here at BR24 Live with the Munich Security Conference.
Say the same thing about our big neighbor to the east, about Russia. When Minister Wang last addressed this room in 2020, being here physically, it was under the difficult circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic, which had just started to dominate the international discourse. Unfortunately, I'm sure I'm not the only one who regrets today that we are not yet totally out of the woods regarding the pandemic, and the circumstances do not permit Minister Wang to join us in person. I think there is also, of course, the Olympic Games still ongoing with, I'm sure, lots of international visitors that he wanted and he needs to say hello to. Instead, he's joining us today virtually and will also be willing to respond to a few questions within the tight schedule that we have. Now, if you guys are not fluent in Mandarin, use your headsets. And I would now want to say thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Thank you very much, State Councillor, for spending time with us today. And you have maybe not the floor, but the screen. Please.
Well, thank you, Chairman Ischinger, my old friend. It is very nice to see you once again.
冬奥会讨论最多的话题就是不确定性。今天的焦点。
I'm delighted to attend the Munich Security Conference once again and to meet with old and new friends on the cloud. In the past few years, the most frequently discussed topic at the MSC was uncertainty, and this year, it has been replaced by a sense of helplessness. All this reflects the deep confusion among nations about the current state of the world, as well as their widely shared concern about its future. Secretary-General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, cautioned expressly many times that the world is at risk of division, and major countries are expected to shoulder their responsibilities and live up to international obligations. As China sees it, this warning is no alarmism. Indeed, our world faces once again the danger of division and confrontation. Certain big power is reviving the Cold War mentality and stoking confrontation between blocs. It willfully wields unilateral sanctions and undermines international rule of law. It puts together various circles and stirs up antagonism. It gets zealous about decoupling and building walls and acts against the trend of globalization. It boasts of its strength and power and glorifies hegemony and bullying. This should not be allowed to continue because it runs counter to the advancement of history. So what shall we do? The answer lies in greater solidarity and cooperation under the banner of multilateralism. As President Xi Jinping highlighted at the World Economic Forum earlier this year, amidst the raging torrents of a global crisis, countries are not riding separately in some 190 small boats, but are rather all in a giant ship on which our shared destiny hinges. Only when countries row the oars together and cheer up each other, rather than undercut and come after one another, can we overcome the current challenges and sail into a bright future. In this process, the role and action of major countries are critically important. Let me share with you 3 points. First, to make the world a better place, major countries must lead by example. President Xi Jinping has stressed time and again that major countries should act like major countries. We expect all major countries to take the lead in supporting multilateralism, living up to their international commitments, acting on the purposes of the UN Charter, and contributing to world peace and development. China has all along been taking real actions to honor its international responsibilities and obligations. Facing the persistent global pandemic, China has acted on President Xi Jinping's announcement to make vaccines public goods and was among the earliest to provide vaccines to countries in need. It has so far provided over 2.1 billion doses of vaccines to more than 120 countries and international organizations. At this moment, we are focusing on providing new, large-scale vaccine assistance to Africa. Facing the sluggish global economic recovery, China has put actions behind the vision of common development. It has worked to advance high-quality Belt and Road cooperation for green, open, and clean development under the principle of high standard, people-centered, and sustainable progress. Facing the impact of COVID-19 on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, China has put forward the Global Development Initiative and called on all countries to take actions together and lend fresh impetus to the realization of the agenda. Facing the complex governance challenge, China has taken an active part in developing global governance systems on climate, environment, health, and in the digital sector, and worked to make globalization more open and beneficial to all. It has been a staunch stalwart of the international system with the United Nations at the center and the international order based on international law. Facing the volatile global landscape, China upholds the new vision of common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security and has worked for political settlement of regional hotspot issues, playing a constructive role in maintaining international peace and security. Facts have proved that China's development has increased certainty in the world and expanded the force for peace. China, with higher quality development and better capability to deliver, will provide stronger impetus for global recovery beyond COVID and greater contribution to international peace and stability. Second, to make the world a better place, countries must work in sync. We need to work together for a new type of international relations based on mutual respect, equity, justice, and win-win cooperation. State-to-state relations should not be simplistically defined by competition only, and no country should be obsessed with turning back the wheel of history and repeat past mistakes of forging rivaling alliances. We need to work together to champion and act on true multilateralism. The authority of the United Nations must be guaranteed, and the purposes and principles of the UN Charter must be upheld. No country, not even a superpower, should replace international norms with its own will, still less put itself above international norms. We need to work together to promote balanced and robust recovery of the world economy. What is urgently needed is further openness and integration, not isolation and decoupling, and to remove trade barriers, bring down exclusive yards with high walls, promote open, green, and common development, and foster and maintain an open world economy. We need to work together to safeguard global peace and tranquility. Security of a country should not come at the expense of that of another country, and security of a region cannot be realized by beefing up military blocs. The idea of exclusive security and absolute security must be rejected. We all must guard against and oppose any attempt for new Cold War and strive for a world of enduring peace. Third, to make the world a better place, China and Europe must play its part. China and Europe are two major forces and great civilizations. We can and we must provide more stability and positive energy for the world. The two sides need to stay committed to the China-EU comprehensive strategic partnership and should not be swayed by any turn of event. China will continue to support European integration, support an EU with greater unity and prosperity, and support European strategic autonomy. At the same time, we hope that Europe could move forward from the partner, competitor, rival characterization of its relations with China, focus on the mainstream of dialogue and cooperation, stick to the keynote of mutual benefit, and view the China-Europe relationship from a strategic and long-term perspective to ensure the overall direction of a healthy relationship. The two sides need to respect each other's core interests and adhere to the basic international norm of non-interference in international affairs. Given the differences in our history, cultural background, and development stage, it is natural that we do not always see eye to eye with each other. China is ready to, on the basis of mutual respect and equality, enhance dialogue with the European side and seek common ground in spite of the differences and find a mutually acceptable path forward. The two sides need to expand mutually beneficial cooperation across the board. China and Europe are linked by highly complementary development edges and a cooperation foundation built over the years. We should look beyond the pandemic to unlock further potential and room for cooperation and give substance to our partnerships for green and digital cooperation so as to bring about greater possibilities and sustained momentum for China-Europe relations. Dear friends, the Olympic Winter Games Beijing 2022 is drawing to a successful conclusion. I wish to take this opportunity to express my hearty appreciation to all those who have warmly supported and participated in the Games. The success of Beijing 2022 is an accomplishment for China, and even more so for the world. The Games, which attracts the eyes of the world, not only brings warmth and hope to people of all countries who are caught in the chilly winter of the pandemic, but also injects the much-needed strength of peace and unity into this volatile world. Together for a shared future. This is the official motto of the Olympic Winter Games Beijing 2022. As we have seen in the field of play, even the strongest contenders can compete peacefully and cheer for one another because their goal is not to beat others but to surpass themselves. The same spirit should also ring true when it comes to relations between states. In this spirit, China is ready to work with all countries as passengers in the same boat and with unity as the sail and cooperation as the oar, sail through the pandemic and toward a brighter future. So these are my opening remarks. Thank you. And now I'm ready for communication and exchanges with Chairman Ischinger and all of you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. And we already have a couple of questions. If I may, I will start with a question that I had thought about, but I also already have more or less the same question from Josh Rogin of the Washington Post. This is on my tablet. So allow me to read the question. 2 weeks ago, President Xi and President Putin attracted a lot of attention with the joint statement they made. And in this joint statement, I quote, "The two sides oppose further enlargement of NATO," unquote. Now, Mr. State Councillor, of course, NATO can only enlarge if a country wishes to join. Now, considering that national sovereignty is, as you just explained, one of China's key principles, why should a sovereign country not be free to join an alliance if it so chooses? And to use the words that Josh Rogin used, which go in the same direction, President Xi says China's foreign policy is based on non-intervention and sovereignty. So why would China not speak up clearly against Putin making threats against Ukraine, a UN member state also? So here we go.
Well, Chairman Ischinger, I expect that the first question from you would be about Ukraine. First of all, let me reiterate that the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of any country should be respected and safeguarded, because this is a basic norm of international relations. It is consistent with the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, and it's the consistent position of the Chinese government. Ukraine is no exception. In the document that the Chinese government has released in the past, there is repeated commitment to safeguarding sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of all countries. If anyone wants to question this position of China, it is ill-intended hyping up and sensationalization, and it is a distortion of China's position. When it comes to NATO, China's position again has been consistent. We always believe that the Cold War has been long gone. NATO was a product of the Cold War era, and now we need to look at the current situation, and there needs to be adaptation to NATO. If there is a persistent easternward expansion, will that really guarantee peace in Europe? Will that truly lead to lasting peace and stability in Europe? I believe that this is a question that our friends in Europe need to have serious consideration about. At the moment, regarding the situation surrounding Ukraine, there is a lot of discussion. China is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. We always make our decisions on our position based on the merits of the issue, and we always play our due constructive role. When it comes to this issue, we believe that now we need to go back to the initial solution of the Minsk agreement, because that agreement was reached by all parties related to this issue, which is a binding agreement. it has been endorsed and recognized by the UN Security Council. It is the only way out for the Ukrainian issue. As far as I understand, the Russian side supports the new Minsk agreement, and for Europe, it also supports this agreement. Recently, U.S. Secretary General, the Secretary of State of the United States, Tony Blinken, called me, and he told me that the United States also supports this agreement. If that is the case, why can't all parties sit down together to have in-depth discussion and to come up with the roadmap and timetable for the implementation of this agreement? I believe that this is what all parties need to focus on. Instead of hyping up tensions, stoking panic, or even sensationalize or trumpeting the risk of war. At this moment, all countries need to shoulder their responsibilities and work for peace.
Thank you very much, State Councilor. I want to remind the audience
about the prospect of this issue. I have a view that I want to share with all of you. Ukraine should be a bridge linking the West and the East and should not be a front line for major power competition. When it comes to this issue, all parties have the right to raise their concerns. While the reasonable concerns of Russia should also be respected and heeded. So we hope that a solution can be found through dialogue and consultation that will really guarantees security and stability in Europe, and a framework leading toward the solution can be found by all parties. Thank you.
Thank you very much, State Councilor. I just want to make clear that our technology does not allow me to take oral questions from the audience. So if you want to ask a question, use the chat room function, and then I can read it, and it works. Then it works. So I'm waiting to get more questions. While in the interim, Mr. State Councilor, let me add the following question, which I've been asked, but which I share personally, because I happen to be a licensed ski instructor. So it's one of my hobbies to follow the Olympics, and I've tried to do that over the last week or so quite intensely. Due to the popularity of the Olympics, a lot of attention has been paid to China internationally. And many around the globe have now learned about the fate of the Uyghurs and allegations about labor and re-education camps for this minority in China. So a question that has been suggested to me is this: when will, or I should maybe say, will UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, have unrestricted access to this region in order to try to verify such allegations? Thank you.
First of all, let me say very clearly that in Xinjiang, there has never been the so-called systematic forced labor or the so-called re-education camp. These are all lies that have been fabricated and spread as disinformation. I hope you can believe that the Chinese government and you can trust what the Chinese government say and what we have been releasing. So what is this matter is truly about? Well, Xinjiang is a place where it has been intensely hit by violent terrorist forces and radical ideologies. In the past few years, Xinjiang was severely threatened by these threats, and some terrorist forces infiltrated into the Xinjiang region. So in order to protect the security and safety of the local people, the local government needed to take actions to strike down on those forces. It has responded to the call of the United Nations, and it has drawn on the experiences and actions and practices of France and other countries, and it has used education to de-radicalize so that the breeding ground for extremism can be removed. This approach has paid off, and it has been supported and welcomed by people of all ethnicities in Xinjiang. For the past few years, there has been no single terrorist attack in Xinjiang. All people in Xinjiang, including the Uyghur people, can live in peace and can live happily. And Xinjiang has been thriving in its economic and social development. Isn't that a good thing? Isn't that a contribution made by China and by the Xinjiang region to the international fight against terrorism? Isn't that a useful exploration of preventive efforts against terrorism? I believe that this should be fully recognized not only by the Chinese people, but also by the international community. As to the lies and misinformation, Xinjiang has opened its door, opened its arms to people in other parts of the world so that they can find out the fact. Let me share with you that before the pandemic, Xinjiang region hosted over 2,000 people, including government officials, religious figures, and journalists from over 100 countries and international organizations. And they saw for themselves a Xinjiang that enjoyed peace, prosperity, and stability, where people of all ethnicities could enjoy the full freedom of religious belief. That is the true Xinjiang. Well, because the pandemic is still ongoing, so there are still restrictions about traveling. But once the situation improves, we welcome all interested people from other parts of the world to go to Xinjiang, and Xinjiang will be happy to have communications and exchanges with foreign friends. But one thing I want to make clear, that what Xinjiang does not welcome is investigation based on presumption of guilt. And the people in Xinjiang reject all kinds of biases, prejudices, and uncalled for accusations on relevant policy of China. As for Ms. Bachelet's visit to China, Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Chairman, China long ago expressed its welcome to Ms. Bachelet and made clear that we welcome her visit, and she can also visit Xinjiang during the visit. There has never been a problem of that. That is just a normal exchange between China and international organizations. Well, right now we are communicating with Ms. Bachelet and his staff. We hope that we can come up with a thoughtful arrangement for her visit. Of course, we respect Ms. Bachelet's own wish, and we believe that when she is in China, she will respect China's sovereignty and rules and regulations. That is how exchanges take place in the world. We believe that when she comes to China, she will be able to see a developing China, and in Xinjiang, she will see a region that enjoys peace and stability, where people live in happiness and harmony. Fact is fact. In front of facts, all the lies, disinformation, and misinformation won't stand a chance and will be busted. This is my answer to the question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Minister Wang. Unfortunately, our time is run out. I'm sure there will be a number of more questions. Thank you for taking time to discuss these issues with us. It is my sincere hope that next year, post-pandemic, let's hope so, you could be here with us again physically and have bilateral meetings in addition, which I'm sure would be extremely interesting and useful to all of us. So let me thank you, and I look forward on behalf of my team and my successor to stay in touch with you, and thank you for your willingness to be open to all the questions that deal with our relationship with China. Thank you very much, sir.
Well, Chairman Ischinger, let me also thank you once again. I have been told that you are about to retire as chairman of the Munich Security Conference. Let me express my appreciation to you on behalf of the Chinese side, and thank you for your contribution to upholding peace and security of Europe, as well as to the enhanced mutual understanding between Europe and other parts of the world. I also salute your objective, just and inclusive position in your work, and I trust that you will continue to make greater contribution. I look forward to attending the conference physically next year. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned, so to speak. We're going.
China on the international stage, and live with us now is former China correspondent Astrid Freieisen. Astrid, thanks for being with us. What do you make of this statement by Wang Yi? We have difficulties hearing you, Astrid. I'm sure we're fixing that technical issue. Please stay tuned. We will be right back.
We in the UK still hope that diplomacy and dialogue may yet succeed. But we also have to be unflinchingly honest about the situation today, when over 130,000 Russian troops are gathering on the borders of Ukraine, and when more than 100 battalion tactical groups threaten that European country. We must be united against that threat, because we should be in no doubt what is at stake here. If Ukraine is invaded, and if Ukraine is overwhelmed, we will witness the destruction of a democratic state, a country that has been free for a generation with a proud history of elections. And every time that Western ministers have visited Kiev, we've assured the people of Ukraine and their leaders that we stand foursquare behind their sovereignty and independence. How hollow, how meaningless, how insulting those words would seem if, at the very moment when their sovereignty and independence is imperiled, of elections. And every time that Western ministers have visited Kiev, we've assured the people of Ukraine and their leaders that we stand foursquare behind their sovereignty and independence. How hollow, how meaningless, how insulting those words would seem if, at the very moment when their sovereignty and independence is imperiled, we simply look away. If Ukraine is invaded, the shock will echo around the world. And those echoes will be heard in East Asia, they will be heard in Taiwan. When I spoke to the Prime Ministers of Japan and Australia this week, they left me in no doubt that the economic and political shocks will be felt on the far side of the world. So let me be clear about the risk. The risk now is that people would draw the conclusion that aggression pays and that might is right. So we should not underestimate the gravity of this moment and what is at stake. As I speak to you today, we do not fully know what President Putin intends, but the omens are grim, and that is why we must stand strong together. The UK has worked with the European Union and the United States to put together the toughest and strongest package of sanctions. And I spoke recently to President Ursula von der Leyen to discuss the measures prepared by the EU in closest coordination with our own. And if Russia invades its neighbour, we will sanction Russian individuals and companies of strategic importance to the Russian state. And we will make it impossible for them to raise finance on the London capital markets. And we will open up the matryoshka dolls of Russian-owned companies and Russian-owned entities to find the ultimate beneficiaries within. And if President Putin believes that by these actions he can drive NATO back or intimidate NATO, he will find that the opposite is the case. Already the UK and our allies are strengthening the defences of the eastern flank of NATO. We're increasing the British contribution to exercise cold response by sending our newest aircraft carrier, HMS Prince of Wales, and 3 Commando Brigade. We're doubling our presence in Estonia to nearly 2,000 troops. We've increased our presence in Poland to 600 troops by sending 350 Marines from 4-5 Commando. We've increased our presence in the skies over southeastern Europe with another 6 Typhoons based in Cyprus. We're sending warships to the eastern Mediterranean and the Black Sea. And I've placed another 1,000 troops on standby to respond to any humanitarian emergency, which we all fear is increasingly likely. And while the most alarming and the most visible threat is the massing of Russian land forces on Ukraine's borders, look at the naval buildup in the Black Sea, which threatens to blockade Ukraine. Look at the massive cyber attacks and the incoming tide of disinformation. This crisis extends into every domain, which is why the UK is providing NATO with more land, sea, and air forces. And it is because we feared a crisis like this that we were already engaged in the biggest increase in defence investment for a generation, spread across conventional capabilities and the new technologies that are ever more important to our collective defence. And I'm proud to say that since Russia invaded Ukraine for the first time and annexed Crimea in 2014, we have been helping Ukraine, training 22,000 troops, and in recent months, in response to the threat, we have been among the nations to send defensive weaponry in the form of 2,000 anti-tank missiles. And I'm glad that we've been joined in this by the United States, by Poland, and by our Baltic allies, and that many other nations and the EU have, like the UK, helped to strengthen Ukraine's economy. Britain will always stand up for freedom and democracy around the world. And when I say that our commitment to European security is immovable and unconditional, our deeds show that we mean our words. We are making the biggest contribution of NATO, to NATO of any European ally because we understand the importance of collective security. And just as our European friends stood by us after the Russian state used chemical weapons in Salisbury, used a chemical weapon in Salisbury, so Britain will stand by you. But we must accept that these measures by the UK and our allies, draconian sanctions, rinsing out dirty money, the intensification of NATO's defences, fortifying our Ukrainian friends, they may not be enough to deter Russian aggression. And it is therefore vital that we learn the lessons of 2014. Whatever happens in the next few days and weeks, we cannot allow European countries to be blackmailed by Russia. We cannot allow the threat of Russian aggression to change the security architecture of Europe. We cannot permit a new Yalta, a new division of our continent into spheres of influence. And we must now wean ourselves off dependence on Putin's oil and gas. And I understand the costs and the complexities of this effort and the fact that it is easier said than done. So I'm grateful to Chancellor Scholz's assurances about Nord Stream 2. But the lessons of the last few years and of Gazprom's obvious manipulation of European gas supply cannot be ignored. We must ensure that by making full use of alternative supplies and technology, we make Russia's threats redundant. And that will be the work of the months and years to come, as well as the necessary and overdue steps that we in the UK must take to protect our own financial system. And we now need to prepare ourselves for the Russian playbook of deception that governs every operation of this kind. There will be a cascade of false claims about Ukraine intended to spread confusion almost for its own sake. And even now there are plans being laid for staged events, spinning a web of falsehoods designed to present any Russian attack as a response to provocation. We've already witnessed a fake military withdrawal combined with staged incidents that could provide a pretext for military action. We knew this was coming. We've seen it before, and no one should be fooled. And we have to steel ourselves for the possibility of a protracted crisis, with Russia maintaining the pressure and searching for weaknesses over an extended period. And we must together refuse to be worn down. What Europe needs is strategic endurance, and we should focus our energies on preserving our unity and on deepening transatlantic cooperation. But for that to work, we must also be prepared to devote the necessary resources to carry a greater share of the burden of preserving our continent's security, and to demonstrate that we are in it for the long haul. For now, we should continue to do everything we can to pursue the path of peace and dialogue. There is a way forward if President Putin is minded to take it. There is a discussion to be had about the threats that he claims to see, because in reality, as we all know, those threats are an illusion. They are the product of the Kremlin's chronic but misguided view of NATO as a supposedly encircling and intimidating alliance. That is not NATO's function. NATO is a peaceful and a defensive alliance. And we are willing to work with President Putin to demonstrate that point and to give him the assurances that he may need. We could point out that until he invaded Ukraine for the first time in 2014, NATO did not permanently station any troops anywhere east of Germany. And it was as recently as 2017 that the US, the UK, and other NATO allies established the enhanced forward presence to protect Poland and the Baltic states. And Even then, the total deployment of fewer than 5,000 troops posed no conceivable threat to Russia. And it is only in the last few weeks, in response to the current crisis, that we have dispatched reinforcements, though still in numbers that constitute no possible threat. Until 2014, European allies were cutting their defence budgets and shrinking their armed forces, perhaps faster than was safe or wise. And to the extent that this has changed, it is because of the actions of President Putin and the tension that he has created. If NATO forces are now closer to Russia's border, it is in response to his decisions and the justified concerns they have provoked among our allies. And there are many things said about what may or may not have been said in the closed-door meetings of 3 decades ago as the Berlin Wall fell and Germany was reunited. But there is no doubt that we all agreed legal obligations to protect the security of every country in Europe. And what happened in those amazing years was the dissolution of the Iron Curtain and the fulfillment of the vision of a Europe whole and free. It was one of the most incredible moments of my lifetime, as nations at the heart of our continent regained their liberty and their sovereign right to control their own destiny and seek their own alliances. We will not abandon the hope and impulse of that era, made possible by the courage of millions of ordinary Europeans. And that's why NATO opened its doors to 14 states after 1999, and we cannot allow our open door to be slammed shut. But if dialogue fails, and if Russia chooses to use violence against an innocent and peaceful population in Ukraine, and to disregard the norms of civilized behavior between states, and to disregard the Charter of the United Nations, then we at this conference should be in no doubt that it is in our collective interest that Russia should ultimately fail and be seen to fail. I believe that in preparing to invade Ukraine, a proud country whose armed forces now exceed 200,000 personnel, considerably more expert in combat today than in 2014, President Putin and his circle are gravely miscalculating. I fear that a lightning war would be followed by a long and hideous period of reprisals and revenge and insurgency. And Russian parents would mourn the loss of young Russian soldiers who, in their way, are every bit as innocent as the Ukrainians now bracing themselves for attack. And if Ukraine is overrun by brute force, I fail to see how a country encompassing nearly 250,000 square miles, the biggest nation in Europe apart from Russia itself, could then be held down and subjugated forever. After a generation of freedom, we're now staring at a generation of bloodshed and misery. I believe that Russia would have absolutely nothing to gain from this catastrophic venture and everything to lose. And while there is still time, I urge the Kremlin to de-escalate, to disengage its forces from the frontier and to renew our dialogue. Every nation at this conference shares a vision of a secure and prosperous Europe of sovereign states, deciding their own destiny and living without fear or threat. And that vision, of course, extends to Russia, a nation whose cultural patrimony we revere and whose sacrifice in the struggle against fascism was immeasurable. Russia has as much right as any other country to live in peace and security. And we should never cease to emphasize that Russia has nothing to fear from our vision, which threatens and marginalizes no one. And as we come together in unity and resolve, we must also show wisdom and moderation, because it's precisely by that unity that we show today that we have the best chance, even now, at this 11th hour, of averting disaster and ensuring that good sense can still prevail. And it is that message of unity that we must send from this conference today. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. What a powerful statement at the end of this morning session here today. Thank you very much. We have only a couple of minutes left, but I'm actually grateful to you, speaking personally, for reminding us that this continent, which many of us have been dreaming of as a continent of peace, of eternal peace, has actually not been a continent of fully established peace, and whatever peace we've had is now under immediate and terrible threat. I think of the Balkans in the 1990s. I think of Georgia in the 2000s. I think of the war that's been going on now since 2014, the conflict in and around Ukraine. Now, here's my question. Given these challenges, of course, we work on the military aspects of deterrence, etc., very well in NATO. But should we not also strive to establish, or maybe I should say re-establish, a more efficient method regarding the closest possible cooperation between your government and the EU on, let's say, especially, of course, on the non-military aspects? There's such a need, as I think, of coordination, cooperation on all sorts of foreign policy aspects. What is your vision regarding the EU-UK relationship in the area of foreign policy?
Well, thanks very much, Wolfgang, and Ambassador Ischinger, I should say. But I want the closest possible cooperation across all aspects of policy, economic, political, diplomatic, military, and if you look at what we're doing in foreign policy coordination, I think it's fair to say that sometimes the UK has been out in front. I think maybe with sanctions on Belarus, we were a little bit ahead of our EU friends. But everything we do is always coordinated with Brussels. And when it comes to preparing the sanctions package against Russia, which has to be as tough as possible if it's going to make any difference to the calculations of Vladimir Putin, we've been working very closely with Ursula von der Leyen. I'll give you a couple more examples on Lithuania and the issue that they have currently with China. There, the UK stands four square with Lithuania and working with our EU friends. I'll just give you, another example of the way in which we continue to work very intensively together. A bit of tiny sort of shard of a fragment of good news is that it may be that the JCPOA has more life in it than we thought, perhaps a few months ago. That's encouraging. This is an example of where the UK and the EU share completely the same objectives, work together hand in glove. So I think that there's ample continuity in our foreign policy coordination, basically because our values are the same. Our values and our objectives are the same. And it's about freedom, it's about democracy, it's about human rights, it's about liberty. And that's what's at stake today in Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Final question. An hour ago or so, we had Vice President Harris speaking here, and I raised with her the concern, which I know exists in the minds of many here on the European side, that when Joe Biden says America is back, the question is this for good? In other words, my question to you is, as British Prime Minister, what, if anything, can we do as Europeans, and you're of course also a European, to make this...
My ancestors come from Munich.
To make this transatlantic relationship sustainably close, to keep the United States engaged well beyond the current administration, where we have no doubt about their commitment, but how do we make it, you know, crystal clear and more permanent again after the experience of the Trump administration?
Well, thank you, Wolfgang. Look, I think actually this experience, terrible though it is, may serve to do even more to unify the transatlantic alliance. And when you think about what Putin wants in this whole diplomatic merry-go-round that we've been seeing, he wants engagement with the United States of America. And what the crisis in Ukraine has done is escalate and demonstrate the fundamental importance of that United States security guarantee to NATO and the crucial role of the United States in guaranteeing peace in Europe. So paradoxically, I think it's helped to bring the US center stage. I think it's also helped to bring NATO center stage, in the sense that we're all now working together to fortify the eastern frontiers of NATO in the way that I described earlier on. And France is helping in Romania. Other countries are supporting NATO engagement across the whole of the eastern perimeter of NATO. And you're seeing an intensification of NATO activity and greater emphasis placed on the importance of NATO in the whole conversation. And that is good, in my view, for transatlantic security. And for me, that underlines the crucial role that NATO plays, the fundamental guarantor of Europe's security, irrespective of all other conversations about European security architecture, to which I, of course, defer and which we can have. But NATO is fundamental and at the core. The final point I would make is that I think that the crisis is bringing us together as we consider what's happening around the world. And so when we think about what's happening in the Indo-Pacific region and the threats to stability, to our values in that region, I think that what's happening in Ukraine now and the collective response that we're seeing to what's happening in Ukraine should now be developed. And we should think of ways in which we can participate together to promote those things we believe in, not just in the European theatre, but around the world. And I hope very much that, and you can see American engagement and American involvement in those questions, and it's absolutely vital that we continue to see it. So we can't say what's going to happen in the course of the next few days. We can't be certain, but I just want to repeat one thing. I believe it absolutely vital for our collective security that the venture, if there is a violent act of aggression by President Putin, that it should not be a success, that it should fail, and that I believe with enough collective resolve we can ensure that it does fail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Let me remind you that after lunch we will have the opportunity to listen to what President Zelensky has to say about the current threatening situation. Prime Minister, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's give a hand to the Prime Minister.